Welcome back to the FanSpeak Network. I'm your host, Megan Shoup. You can follow me on Twitter at Megs08DFS, and we are back for our second season of Tiers for Fears. That's right, we are going to be covering the Tiers contest on DraftKings every single week right here on the FanSpeak Network. So before we get started, please be sure to like this episode and subscribe to the FanSpeak Network. We're just getting started with a ton of daily fantasy and sports betting and underdog pick'ems and all sorts of fun stuff that we'll have on this network all NFL season long. I'm so excited that the NFL season is back. And this is, of course, brought to you by Run the Sims, because we use Run the Sims to help make our decisions in tiers. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring over Run the Sims and show some of the tools that they have that help us make our tiers decisions, especially when you're coming down to like a 1v1 in a particular tier. So I'm going to jump over here. And as you can see, I'm looking at their player percentile projections tool for week 1. And what it does is you can kind of highlight the 90th percentile outcome, and it ranks the players. So you can kind of see where the players are ranking at each individual position. And that's one tool that I use to help me. And then another tool that they have is their rangefinder tool. And you can use it for sports betting and put in the player props, but I use the rangefinder tool. And what you do is you could put in two players, let's just put in two quarterbacks. I like Kirk Cousins this week, and I like Joe Burrow a lot this week. So let's put in both Cousins and Burrow and see how they rank against each other. This can help me make a 1v1 decision, which we'll get to that as we go through the tiers, because we will do that shortly. So it's bringing it up, and then it'll give the different median projections and the win rate. And the win rate's pretty close, but Joe Burrow has the highest win rate, as you can see. So this rangefinder tool can be very helpful to make 1v1 decisions in a particular tier. But the way this is going to work as we do our weekly Tiers for Fears show is each week I'm going to go tier by tier and give you my core plays. And then I'm going to give you, what is my favorite play in that tier. But if you're playing multiple lineups like I am, I'm not a mass multi-entry player. I'm more like for tiers, I play about 20 to 25 lineups. So for those 20 to 25 lineups, I'll have a player pool. And I think it is very important to keep a pretty condensed player pool, especially if you're only, not playing 150 lineups. If you're only playing, 3, 5, 10, 20 lineups, it's important to kind of condense that player pool so you can get a good rotation and mix of the players you really like and kind of get them mixed together. So that's why in each tier, as I go through, I'll give you my core plays that will be in my player pool, and then I'll give you my favorite play that I'll put together for a lineup just to show you as an example. So now let's bring over DraftKings. So give me 1 second, because I'm the producer here too, and your host. So let me bring over DraftKings so we can take a look at the tiers and go tier by tier. So let's take a look right now. We are looking at tier 1. And in tier 1, of course, we have quarterbacks. And we've got Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts. Well, here's what I basically think. I think if you've been following my content and my brother Steve's content this off season in the summer, in best ball, in sports betting, and week 1, we are not as high as the field and the industry and the public as most people are on Jalen Hurts. Listen, Jalen Hurts got most of his production on the ground last year in fantasy. And while that is still production and still works, I think a lot of people expect the addition of A.J. Brown to make him this dual threat quarterback. Well, dual threat would mean that he's actually going to do it passing too. And he really very rarely showed that passing. I mean, we're just talking a handful of games over 300 yards, one game with 3 touchdowns last year. I just don't think the addition of A.J. Brown all of a sudden makes him, Tom Brady or Joe Burrow from an accuracy or efficiency standpoint. And so that concerns me. Also, the arm strength. It's not like he has like a Kyler Murray or Trey Lance or Josh Allen, big arm and tons of arm strength. He has fairly average arm strength to fit in those tight window throws that, you know, they are going to need him to be much more efficient if they want them to be a more pass first offense. Because remember, by really the middle through the end of the season, it was more of a run first offense. And that's why he was getting it more on the ground. That was my very long way of saying I'm fading Jalen Hurts here. I know that's a huge stand to make. And it's a risky one because let's be honest, he can get 2 or 3 rushing touchdowns, but I think that's hard to replicate. He got 10 rushing touchdowns last year. There were a couple games where he got 2, one game where he got 3. And yeah, if he gets 2 or 3 touchdowns, he's going to hurt me. But if he doesn't, and if he's not as the efficient quarterback as I think people think he may be, you know, it's going to come down to his right arm. If he's not as an efficient passer and not a dual threat, then I don't think he's going to hurt me because we are full. This tier is full of 2 MVPs in Mahomes and Jackson, and one, I think, future MVP. I bet Justin Herbert to win MVP this year. So my picks or my core plays for this tier are Patrick Mahomes in the highest total game, Justin Herbert in one of the highest total games. Those are my 2 core plays. And then Lamar Jackson, I'll sprinkle in. I'll say sprinkle for Lamar Jackson just because, you know, Jackson seems to get those higher scoring dual threat games when they are a much closer back and forth shootout as opposed to a game where the Ravens are ahead by a lot. So my core is Mahomes, Herbert, and Jackson a sprinkle, fading Hurts. And then my favorite play, though, for this tier is Justin Herbert. Again, I said I think he could be the potential MVP against, I think all AFC West games this year are going to be a shootout. And I think it's going to start week 1 with the Chargers and Raiders. So I'm going to go Justin Herbert as my tier 1 play. Let's move over to tier 2. And tier 2, so how it works if you haven't played tiers before, and just a quick backstory is I will be doing a like kind of a tiers strategy and tiers data show because I have looked at past data. And so I'll kind of bring that up as we're going through the tiers here for week 1. But I am going to do a tiers strategy and data show so that you can really keep that in mind as you're building your weekly tiers lineups. But, you know, the nuances of tiers are that tier 1 and tier 5 are quarterbacks, and tiers 2, 3, 4 are kind of those stud players. Well, we have a mix of stud running backs and stud receiver, a stud receiver here in tier 2. I tend to lean the stud running backs here, but we have a lot of them. We've got Derrick Henry, we've got Jonathan Taylor, we've got Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffrey, and then, of course, Davante Adams. Now, some people would say, well, why don't you game stack and go Davante Adams here? Here's the thing with tiers. You don't have to really force the stacks that you do in Classic or even Showdown as much. Yes, it's still good to have correlation in the top 1. And again, we'll cover this in the data show. In the top 1% of lineups, there was usually at least 1 quarterback stacked with a receiver, sometimes 2 in the top 1% of lineups, but don't feel like you have to get these massive game stacks all over the place. Now, if this Chargers Raiders game does turn out to be, you know, 42-38, then yeah, you probably do want to stack this game up. And there may be one lineup that I do that. Again, it depends how many lineups you're doing. But in this case, my core plays are going to be Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, and Christian McCaffrey. And when I use Run the Sims, you know, it was very, very close between Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey, my 2 favorite. But I'm going to go Christian McCaffrey here as my tier 2 play. Listen, I've been bullish on him all summer in best ball, and I'm not going to stop here in week 1. I think Baker Mayfield as the quarterback will move this offense, give them more scoring opportunities. And you got to remember, when Christian McCaffrey's healthy, he is a dual threat to get potentially double bonus on the ground and passing or in the receiving. He can rack up a bunch of catches. Since this is PPR, I really like McCaffrey to really have the potential to hit his ceiling here. So he is my tier 2 play. So let's head over to tier 3. And again, we've got more studs, a mix of running backs and receivers. And they're coming from mainly 2 of my actually favorite games. After you get past the Kansas City, Arizona game, the Chargers, Raiders game, 2 of the other games I really like on the slate are the Vikings, Packers, and the Bengals, Steelers. So we've got a lot of players from those games. We've got Justin Jefferson. We do have Alvin Kamara from the Saints, Jamar Chase, Joe Mixon, and Dalvin Cook. Now, this one is close for me, and it's kind of funny. In tier 2, I tend to lean to like the stud running backs. In tier 3 last year, data showed the stud receivers really dominated, and probably because Jamar Chase was in tier 3 a lot last year. So I do love both Chase and Jefferson are my favorite and core plays that I'll have the most exposure to in this tier. May sprinkle a little bit of Dalvin Cook as well. But Chase and Jefferson are my two favorite. And when I went over to run the Sims, it was close, but Justin Jefferson did have the higher range of outcomes and the higher ceiling. So I'm going to go Justin Jefferson as my tier 3 play. All right, in tier 4, we have Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill, Mark Andrews, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Swift, and A.J. Brown. And in this tier, Deebo Samuel, he's going against the Bears. So obviously, I do think San Francisco is going to win that game comfortably. So I'm not sure that I see a ceiling outcome for him. I already expressed with Philly, I don't know if it's going to be as pass happy as people think. I'm making a big stand on Philly, and I won't have as much exposure to A.J. Brown. So my favorite plays here are Tyreek Hill, Mark Andrews, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Swift. I probably just like I did with Lamar, I'm just going to sprinkle Mark Andrews. I do think the target share between him and Bateman could be really high. But again, I don't know that they're going to need him to hit that ceiling outcome in a game against the Jets. So I really like Hill, Allen, and Swift the best. I mean, I'm going to honestly be rotating through. You don't have to force a stack, but in this case, I will do a stack and love Keenan Allen to start the year and stack with Justin Herbert in tier 4. Okay, back to quarterbacks in tier 5, and we have Kyler Murray, Aaron Rodgers, Joe Burrow, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, and Trey Lance. So I like 4 quarterbacks in this tier. I like Kyler Murray in the highest total game, obviously. I love Joe Burrow this season. I think people are sleeping on him this season. I don't know how. They are the AFC champions, and we just saw them in the Super Bowl. And somehow people seem down on the Bengals this year after they went and got Joe Burrow 3 new offensive linemen. That was their biggest issue last year. He, even with a bad offensive line, was the most accurate quarterback with a 70.4 completion percentage. And now he has a better offensive line and more time to get the ball to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and company. I mean, I've said this before, this is cheat code to me. And I love Joe Burrow this season. I want to be early to that. So Kyler Murray, highest total game. Joe Burrow, love him to start the season. Kirk Cousins, I've been bullish on the Vikings all offseason, all summer. I bet them to win the NFC North. I have some other big futures bets on the Vikings. Love the Vikings and the addition of Kevin O'Connell in that offense. He worked with Kirk Cousins in Washington, actually in Cousins last season in Washington. And then Derek Carr in that potential shootout again against Justin Herbert. Now you could do like a stack there again, but again, you don't have to force it. So you saw me run between Burrow and Cousins. I do like Murray too, but I do think he's going to be a little higher owned. So in tiers 5 through 8, I like to take a little bit more ownership stands than I do in the first 4 tiers. And that's something to keep in mind that, again, we will talk about in the data and strategy show. But you really only need to find those sub 15% owned players in about 2 tiers. In the top 1% lineups, about 2 tiers was where those players found sub 15% ownership. And of course, tiers 5 through 8 have more players. So you're naturally going to get the ownership dispersed more. But I do think there are certain tiers like this where people will just gravitate to the highest scoring game, Kyler Murray. Or as I mentioned earlier, I love, people who love Jalen Hurts in best ball this season will, could get a lot of ownership there. So I'm going to go with the guy that people have kind of been fading this year. And he also, as we went over to run the Sims, had a higher range of outcomes and had a higher ceiling projection. And I'm going to go with Joe Burrow in tier 5. So we go over to tier 6 and we have Travis Kelce, James Conner, Nick Chubb, Aaron Jones, Mike Williams, charted from the Chargers, and Terry McLaurin. Now, of course, as a Washington fan, I want to just plug Terry McLaurin in, and he will be in my core. My core for this one, honestly, is going to be more dispersed than the other ones. The other ones, I'm going to try to have a tighter core, but I love all of Kelce in the highest total game, Connor in the highest total game, Aaron Jones. I think they're going to have to use him split out as a receiver. They have done that before when Devontae Adams was out in the past, and now with no Devontae Adams, Lazard is questionable. I really like Aaron Jones this week. Mike Williams and Terry McLaurin, they're all going to be in my core plays. But I actually am going to have a little correlation with Justin Jefferson and go Aaron Jones here. When I went over to run the Sims, he did have the highest percentile projection. So I really like that. So let's go over to tier 7. Again, 7 and 8. I really like to try to look for some lower owned players and kind of find those one or two guys that could be sub 15% owned. So we've got Najee Harris, T. Higgins, Josh Jacobs, Brandon Cooks, Marquise Brown, Michael Pittman Jr., Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Saquon Barkley. And in this tier, I tend to really like the receivers here, to be quite honest. I'm not as high this week on Harris, Jacobs, Barkley in those offenses in their games or game environments. So I really like basically all the receivers here of Higgins, Marquise Brown, Michael Pittman Jr., Amon-Ra St. Brown. Actually, if you go over to Run the Sims, Amon-Ra St. Brown had the highest percentile projections and kind of wiped the floor with all the other guys in the rangefinder tool. So I do like all these other receivers, but I'm going to go Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I actually think he's going to come in lower owned compared to some of those other receivers. And so we could find a little bit lower ownership for him here in tier 7. All right, on to the final tier, tier 8. We have Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, Jalen Waddle, David Montgomery, DJ Moore, Alan Lazard, who is questionable, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Travis Etienne coming back from injury. Obviously, you can see there's 2 guys who are questionable here. That is something to obviously monitor and keep an eye on. Yet again, I am drawn to the receivers here in tier 8. So I really like Adam Thielen, Jalen Waddle, DJ Moore. Right now, Lazard is questionable, and Juju Smith-Schuster. So those 4 are my core plays. And I went over, again, Run the Sims, and Waddle actually had the highest range in the rangefinder and the percentile projections. And so by using those tools, I really think that I can see where that actually could be the outcome here, despite loving DJ Moore. I've loved him all off season. Juju Smith-Schuster in the highest total, and Adam Thielen. I said I've been bullish on the Vikings. I could see where Jalen Waddle could be the lowest owned play here and have the highest ceiling. I love the Mike McDaniel hire for the Dolphins. I love what he could do for Tua in this offense, and I want to be early to this as well. And if I could get an ownership discount too, I'm going to go Jalen Waddle as my tier 8 play. So what do you think for our first tiers for fears? How did I do? So please, in the comments section, let me know how I did. Let me know who you like as your core plays or who you're fading, if you have any big stands too. Again, before you get out of here, be sure to check out Run the Sims. Be sure to like this episode and subscribe to the FanSpeak Network. Again, we're going to have tons of great daily fantasy and sports betting content all season, and Tears for Fears will be here every Thursday or Friday. And also check FanSpeak Friday, Saturday morning at the latest, and I will have my full updated tiers picks all on the website on fanspeak.com. So thank you so much for joining us, and now let's go make some money.